The Jinn, Islam's ancient parallel civilization hidden in plain sight. A YouTube documentary script. Hook, 30 seconds. Before angels. Before humans. Before the first prayer was spoken into the dark. Something else was already here. Not demons. Not gods. Not ghosts. Something stranger than all three combined. A civilization older than recorded history, built from smokeless fire, occupying the same world you walk through every single day, invisible, sovereign, and according to one of the world's most meticulously documented religious traditions, absolutely, unambiguously real. The Quran names them directly. 46 times. Not as metaphor. Not as folklore. As fact. This is the story of the Jinn. Background, 3 minutes. Let us establish the geography of the impossible. The Arabian Peninsula, roughly 3,000 years before the Common Era. A world of crushing heat, brutal commerce, and a spiritual landscape so dense with invisible forces that travelers would announce themselves to local spirits before entering a valley, just in case. Etiquette with the unseen was not superstition. It was survival protocol. Into this world, a cosmology emerges that is unlike anything the ancient Mediterranean or Mesopotamian traditions produced. The Greeks gave you the Titans, enormous, comprehensible, essentially just humans with a size problem and a rage disorder. The Egyptians gave you gods with animal heads who presided over specific portfolios like cosmic middle management. The Norse gave you Odin, essentially a one-eyed warlord with a drinking problem and a spectacular PR department called the Prose Edda. All of these traditions imagined the supernatural as above humanity. Elevated. Separate. The Arabic tradition did something philosophically radical. It imagined a parallel. According to Islamic theology, reality was created in 3 distinct categories of sapient being. Angels, fashioned from light, incapable of free will, essentially the universe's civil service. Humans, fashioned from clay, given free will, famously bad at using it. And Jinn, fashioned from Marij Minit Nar, smokeless fire, given free will, and crucially, already here when humans arrived. That timeline matters enormously and almost nobody discusses it. The Jinn are not a human invention projected outward. In the Islamic cosmological framework, they predate us. When Allah commanded the angels to bow before Adam, the first human, one being refused. Iblis. Who was, the tradition tells us, not an angel at all. He was a Jinn. One who had risen so high in devotion and knowledge that he dwelt among angels. But when the test came, his nature revealed itself. Pride. The oldest catastrophe. The word Jinn itself derives from the Arabic root jana, meaning hidden or concealed. They are, linguistically, the hidden ones. And this is not poetic decoration. It is theological description. They occupy physical space. They breathe air, or something functionally equivalent. They eat, reproduce, form societies, argue about theology, go to war, fall in love, and die. They simply do so in a frequency of existence that human sensory apparatus cannot detect. Which raises a question that should genuinely unsettle you. If they're in the same space, what are they doing right now? Rising action, 6 minutes. Medieval Islamic scholars did what scholars do when confronted with the enormous and terrifying, they made a spreadsheet. The taxonomy of Jinn is one of the most sophisticated classifications of supernatural entities ever produced by any civilization. This is not the crude binary of good ghost, bad ghost that most traditions settle for. This is a full spectrum, a civilization with internal variety. At the lowest tier, the Jann. The simplest form. Often shapeshifters, frequently appearing as animals, particularly dogs and snakes. Considered the Jinn equivalent of commoners. The Shayotan, corrupted Jinn who have aligned with Iblis, the equivalent of what Western traditions would lazily label the demons. But even this is more nuanced. They are not uniformly evil. They are oppositional. There is a difference. The Ifrit, and here is where things become genuinely extraordinary. The Ifrit appear in the Quran itself, in Surah and Naml. When King Solomon asks who can bring him the throne of the Queen of Sheba before she arrives, an Ifrit stands and says, "I will bring it to you before you rise from your place." Not centuries. Not years. Before a man can stand up from a seated position. Solomon, who in the Islamic tradition is not merely a king but a prophet gifted with explicit dominion over the jinn, appears repeatedly as the figure who bridges the human and jinn worlds. He possessed a ring, a seal, through which he commanded jinn to build the temple, to dive for pearls, to create works of art that no human craftsman could have produced alone. The Seal of Solomon. You have seen this symbol. You have likely never understood what it was actually for. Moving upward in the taxonomy, the married. Ocean-dwelling, extraordinarily powerful, associated with the open sea. When you encounter a genie in a bottle in Western popular culture, you are looking at a thoroughly disemboweled married, a being of near incomprehensible power reduced to a wishing machine in Disney's creative blender. And at the apex, the Sylar. Master shapeshifters. The jinn you would never detect because they could become anything. Anyone. Your neighbor. Your spouse. Sitting across from you at dinner. Now. A comparison that the script demands. The jinn as a concept, a parallel civilization of sapient beings with free will, organized into factions, with their own history and theology, occupying the same physical space as humans but in a hidden register. This concept should sound extremely familiar to anyone who has spent time in certain beloved fictional universes. Tolkien's elves. Think about it without the nostalgia for a moment. In the Legendarium, the elves were already in Middle-earth when men arrived. They are bound to ardor in ways men are not. They operate on longer timescales, perceive reality differently, and have an entire civilization, Valinor, the hidden kingdoms, the Grey Havens, that exists adjacent to the mortal world rather than inside it. Tolkien was a devout Catholic, but he was also a medievalist who had read extensively in Arabic and Islamic scholarship. The structural parallel between the jinn and the elves is not coincidental. It is the deep grammar of parallel civilization, recurring because it maps onto something real in human intuition. George Lucas, building Star Wars, drew on Joseph Campbell's monomyth, but the Force, specifically, has a quality that maps fascinatingly onto jinn theology. The Force exists everywhere. It is not worshipped, it is attuned to. Midichlorians, the most mocked concept in Star Wars lore, are essentially microscopic entities that serve as an interface between the living world and the Force. They are, in function, strikingly similar to the jinn concept of Kareen, a personal jinn attached to every human being from birth, whispering. Your dark impulses, in classical Islamic theology, have a source. A companion entity that shares your life and knows your weaknesses perfectly because it has been with you since before you could speak. The dark side has a taxonomy. The light side has protocols. The Force is hidden. It is everywhere. The people who can navigate it form a separate order. Smokeless fire. Midichlorians. Jedi. Sorcerers. The archetype runs deep. Marvel's approach is blunter but worth examining. The jinn appear in Doctor Strange's lore, sorcerers drawing power from dimensional entities who are, in the source material, essentially higher-order beings in adjacent dimensional spaces. The Darkhold. The Vishanti. These are, structurally, jinn with doctorate degrees and worse fashion. But beyond the franchise comparisons, there is the historical record, and the historical record is strange. Reports of jinn encounters in classical Arabic literature are not the vague, impressionistic ghost stories of European folklore. They are specific, documented, cross-referenced. A traveler in the desert who follows a light and loses 3 days. A scholar in Baghdad who reports that a jinn attended his lectures for a semester, disguised as a student, before revealing itself to debate a point of Quranic interpretation. Poets, the Shura of pre-Islamic Arabia, who claimed their verses were dictated to them by jinn companions. This last point matters. Pre-Islamic Arab society attributed poetic genius specifically to jinn contact. Each poet had a jinn, a tabi'eh, who was the actual source of inspiration. Homer had the muses. Arab poets had jinn. The muses were metaphor, eventually. The Tabi'e were roommates. Climax, 5 minutes. The year is approximately 610 CE. A merchant named Muhammad, 40 years old, retreating to a cave called Hira on a mountain called Jabal al-Nu outside Mecca for contemplation, a practice he had maintained for years, receives what Islamic theology considers the first revelation of the Quran. But before that night, before that cave, something else happened. In the years leading to the prophetic mission, something shifted in the unseen world. Reports across Arabia describe Jinn being blocked from the lowest heaven, al-Sama al-Dunya, where they had previously eavesdropped on angelic communication and sold the information to human fortune-tellers. Suddenly, the skies were being patrolled. Shooting stars, which in Islamic cosmology are specifically thrown at eavesdropping jinn, multiplied dramatically. The fortune-tellers noticed. Their jinn informants went silent, or brought back confused, fragmented messages. An entire intelligence network, spiritual in nature, suddenly went dark. And then, the Quran descended. And embedded within it, an entire surah, chapter 72, Surah al-Jinn, recounting in the voice of a group of jinn who heard the Quran being recited, who converted, who returned to their communities to preach Islam. Read that again slowly. The Quran contains a chapter narrated from the perspective of jinn, non-human sapient beings, having a religious experience and choosing faith. This is not mythology. This is not allegory. In the Islamic framework, this is news. A news report from another civilization, embedded in the central religious text of 1.8 billion people. The jinn said, and the Quran records their words, "We have heard a wondrous recitation. It guides to righteousness, and we have believed in it. We will never associate anything with our Lord." The theological implications of this single chapter are staggering and almost universally under-discussed in Western engagement with Islam. It establishes that the Quran was not delivered exclusively to humans. The jinn have their own prophetic tradition, the same prophets shared. Jinn will face the same judgment as humans, heaven and hell apply equally. There are Muslim jinn, Jewish jinn, Christian jinn, pagan jinn. They are, in the fullest sense, moral agents in the same cosmic drama. The parallel civilization is not just present. It is participating. Now consider what this does to the Norse parallel. In the Norse cosmological structure, you have the 9 realms, Midgard for humans, Asgard for gods, Jotunheim for giants, and so on. These are separated. They do not share moral stakes. Ragnarok is the gods' problem. Humans are, essentially, livestock with good stories. The Egyptian cosmology similarly divides the stakes. The Duat, the underworld, is the gods' domain. Humans pass through it, but don't participate in its governance or drama. The gods' politics are the gods' politics. The Greco-Roman tradition comes closest to the jinn status, daemons, the intermediate beings between gods and humans, who could be good or ill, personal or impersonal, and who required propitiation, but even here, the daemons lack the full moral agency, the capacity for religious conversion, the civilization implied by jinn theology. What the jinn framework does that is genuinely unique in world mythology is give the invisible world stakes equivalent to our own. They are not more important than humans. They are not less. They are alongside. And then there is Iblis, the figure who refused to bow. Who has, since that first act of cosmic defiance, dedicated an existence of incomprehensible length to the project of human corruption. Not because he hates humans, exactly, though the Quran records him saying as much. But because he made a bet. He told God, "Give me time until the day of resurrection, and I will prove that humans do not deserve the honor you gave them when you commanded us to bow. I will come at them from every direction. From before them and behind them. From their right and from their left. And you will not find most of them grateful." This is not a demon lord with horns and a pitchfork. This is a prosecutor. An adversary who has filed a cosmic lawsuit against the human species and is currently 30-some centuries deep into presenting evidence. He may be making a decent case. Aftermath. 3 minutes. In the centuries following the founding of Islam, Jinn theology became an extraordinary intersection of law, medicine, spirituality, and philosophy. Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, actually addressed the jinn. Can a human legally marry a jinn? Several medieval jurists said, technically yes, though inadvisable and discouraged. What obligations do jinn have regarding Friday prayers? What constitutes halal food for a jinn? These were not hypothetical thought experiments. They were practical questions from a tradition that took the reality of jinn with absolute seriousness. Medical practice in the Islamic world incorporated jinn theory directly. What the Greeks attributed to imbalanced humors, what we now attribute to neurochemistry, medieval Islamic physicians sometimes attributed to jinn interference, specifically the qareen, the personal jinn companion, becoming adversarial. The treatment was not purely spiritual. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the greatest physician of the medieval world, wrote about psychological conditions with sophisticated clinical observation while simultaneously not dismissing the jinn framework. He held both the scientific and the spiritual, without apparent cognitive strain. The legacy spread in unexpected directions. Every genie in a bottle you have ever seen, from the 1001 Nights to Aladdin to Barbara Eden in a pink outfit, is a catastrophically degraded married. A being of enormous power, reduced to consumer goods delivery, bottled and weaponized for entertainment. The original stories were stranger, darker. The jinn of the 1001 Nights are not wish-granters by default. They are dangerous. They have agendas. They make deals with the precision of experienced lawyers because they have been making deals with humans for longer than human civilization has had lawyers. The West discovered the 1001 Nights through Antoine Galland 1700 for French translation and immediately stripped it of its